Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special introduction to World War service records. My name is Veronica Gunn, and I'm an archival officer at the National Archives office here in Melbourne. Today's presentation was developed by the National Archives Victorian Public Engagement team, and I'm looking forward to presenting this to you today. So I'd like to start with the acknowledgement of country. The National Archives of Australia acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and acknowledges their continuing connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the people, their cultures and elders past, present and emerging. So today we'll start with an overview of the National Archives. We will then look at service records for the First and Second World Wars. We will then show you how you can find and access these records via our website and also share some tips and tricks to help you with your searches. So the National Archives of Australia is the archive of the Australian, that is, Federal Commonwealth Government. We operate under the provisions of the Archives Act 1983. This gives us a mandate to select, manage and preserve the National Archival collection. We also provide record-keeping advice and guidance to Australian government agencies, including working with them to determine which records should be transferred to the National Archives for ongoing preservation. The Archives Act also gives Australians a right of access to Commonwealth records over 20 years old, subject to certain exemptions identified in our legislation. These exemptions relate to things like national security, defence and foreign affairs, and personal privacy. So the National Archives is the only Commonwealth cultural institution which has a presence in every state and territory. Here in Victoria, we are co-located with the Public Record Office Victoria, known as PROV, at the Victorian Archives Centre in North Melbourne. Our research centre is open Wednesdays through to Fridays from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. You can also submit online reference inquiries to National Archives at any time via our website. We also have a purpose-built repository at East Burwood. This currently houses around 53 kilometres of records, making it the third largest repository in the National Archives network after Canberra and Sydney. And finally, before we dive into the service records that we hold, it is worthwhile explaining how the National Archival collection is organised. Like any collection, it has a structure. This is provided by the Commonwealth Records Series, CRS system. Put simply, agencies, that is government agencies such as the Department of Defence, create series of records which document their business transactions. A series is a group of records that has resulted from the same filing process or that has similar information content. Series then consist of items, and depending on the series, these could be files, photographs, maps, plans, or sound recordings, etc. So the key World War service records series were recorded by the different services. For Army, there are separate series for World War I and World War II service. For the Royal Australian Navy, their main service card series covers both conflicts. The key Royal Australian Air Force series begins with the RAF's establishment in 1921 and continues until 1948. So let's start with the First World War Army service records. And just before I do, I'll just mention for those who are curious, the photos here are of Sir John Monash, who's no stranger, who's a military commander here at the 1931 Anzac Parade in Melbourne. Edward Bage, who was an Antarctic explorer and astronomer prior to the World War I outbreak. He was killed near Lone Pine in Gallipoli, and Australian soldiers in the trenches at Gallipoli. And you can see there are some Turkish dead at the top of the trenches. So the key series for World War I Army service is B2455, the first Australian Imperial Force personnel dossiers. Despite the title, this series contains the service records of not just those who served in the AIF, but also the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force, the Royal Australian Naval Bridging Train, the Australian Flying Corps, and the Australian Army Nursing Service. With over 376,000 individual items, this is one of the most complete World War I service record series in the world. The records occupy over 3 kilometres of shelf space in our Canberra repository. Records are also an amazing feat of record keeping and updating records about personnel serving as far afield at New Guinea, the Middle East, the Western Front, and in the UK. To do this, the Army established the Base Records Office in October 1914 to take responsibility for the growing number of military personnel records. Before embarkation of a unit, originals and duplicates of attestation papers and other records were forwarded to the Base Records Office. Later, there were Base Records offices in London, France, and Egypt. The files were used primarily for administering the movement of troops and to pay them. So as a result, they contain only the essentials of individuals. Essentials of the individual service. So these types of records you'll typically find will include their original attestation or enlistment papers, summary information about their service, including deaths, injuries, and sicknesses, information about medals and awards, and any correspondence about the soldier. This can include post-World War I correspondence, for example, replacement of medals. The extent to which this information is available for a specific soldier varies considerably. This is because the Department of Defence culled the files extensively in the 1950s, removing information not considered essential to the record of service. So let's take a look at a typical World War I Army service record for a Hugh Norman Coventry. Hugh Coventry was one of 3 brothers from Diamond Creek to enlist in World War I. He unfortunately was killed in action in France in 1916, and 2 of his brothers, however, went on to become Collingwood football greats, Sid and Gordon Coventry. And according to family stories, Hugh was as good a footballer as both Sid and Gordon. He was also uncle to a 3rd Collingwood great, Hugh Norman Coventry Jr. So this is Hugh's original attestation form when he applied to enlist in the 1st AIF in December 1915. From this we can see his basic biographical details, including place of birth, age, he was just 20, and his occupation. His next of kin was originally listed as his father. However, Hugh got married to his sweetheart just 4 days before he embarked overseas, and you can see that the change has been made in red. On the left, we have the oath of allegiance Hugh signed upon enlistment. On the right, there is a detailed physical description of Hugh. So no photographs were taken upon enlistment. There were no photos taken of any people who enlisted for World War I. Here we have Hugh's service and casualty forms. As you can see, it is a very summarised record of his service. It starts at the top with his original regimental details, private number 3787, with the 9th Reinforcement for the 24th Battalion. Some of the other key details this form provides includes the name of the ship Hugh travelled to France on, the date he was taken on strength with his unit in France, and unfortunately the date he was killed in action. There is a mention in dispatches for his good and gallant conduct at the Battle of Pozières. Hugh's file contains some other documentation here regarding his death as well. And the file also contains details of the medals issued for Hugh. In this case, he received the 1914-15 Star, the British War Medal, and the Victory Medal. As Hugh was killed in action, his wife Coral also received a memorial plaque. This became colloquially known as a dead man's penny, shown here. As mentioned earlier, there can also be other administrative correspondence about the soldier on these service dossiers. Sometimes, though, these can provide interesting or unexpected details. For example, here we see details of Hugh's few personal effects consisting of 8 religious badges, a religious book, a gift tin, razor, belt, key, and badges. He was therefore perhaps a very religious man, or perhaps he was very conscious of his potential mortality. And on the right is the receipt for the package signed by his widow. So on to Second World War Army Service Records. They're divided into 2 series, the B883s, Second Imperial Force. This was raised to enable Australians to serve overseas. The B884s, Citizen Military Force. This was a militia force which could only serve on Australian territory. During World War II, it included many people who were conscripted. It also sometimes colloquially referred to as Dad's Army, as it often included older citizens, such as returned World War I servicemen. So here we have a record search for a Sister Wilma Oram, who was a nurse and POW in Singapore and Malaya. Here we have her enlistment papers. The first thing you can see is that she has 2 World War II service numbers. In March 1941, she was initially enlisted in the Citizen Military Force and given the service number V12153. In June, she was enlisted in the AIF, which enabled her to go overseas, and she was given the service number VX58983. So moving from the CMF to the AIF was not uncommon. Usually the CMF paperwork was then amalgamated onto the AIF file in the B883 series, as is the case with Wilma's. Occasionally, however, this didn't happen, and you might find separate files for the same person in B883 and B884. It is worth noting that the files of many people who enlisted in the AIF have photographs. This is much less common for the CMF, and approximately 40% overall of World War II servicemen and women had their photograph taken and added to their record. So the contents of World War II Army service files are similar to that of World War I files. Here is Wilma's officer's record of service, similar to the service and casualty form we saw earlier for Hugh Coventry. It also has a very summarised account of her service. There is usually a discharge card, which presents a useful summary of service, including the amount of time spent outside of Australia. This small slip of paper will show you the medals issued at the time. As with World War I Army service records, there can also be other correspondence on the file related to the subject's service. In this case, it is a copy of a letter from the Minister of Defence, Science and Personnel to a Mrs. P.R. Wilson, who had made representations for Wilma to be issued with the Royal Red Cross, an Imperial decoration for nurses. Note that this one dates from 1995. So there are two key series for service with the Royal Australian Navy, the A6769s and A6770. These are service cards for Navy officers, petty officers, and enlisted men. So let's take a look at one of the items. This the service cards for Captain Hector Waller. He was born in Benalla, Northern Victoria, on 4th of April 1900. On Hector's naval service card, we see his various ranks and promotions. Hector joined the Royal Australian Navy as a cadet midshipman at the age of just 13. During his career, he rose to the rank of captain in June 1940. We also see details of his examinations as well as miscellaneous information about his service, such as being awarded the Distinguished Service Order. The Navy service cards provide details of Hector's movements and postings, from his attendance at the Royal Australian Naval College in 1913 until the sinking of the HMAS Perth in 1942. Here we have circled Hector's World War I and World War II service with the Royal Australian Navy to show how they are included in the one record. There are also two series of RAF service records. For World War II, they are the A9300s and A9301. Like the service cards for the Royal Australian Navy, these are based on rank, with one series for officers and another for non-commissioned officers and other ranks. And here we have an example of a RAF service record for a Mr. John Gadsden. As we can see from John's enlistment, he was born in Toorak, Victoria in 1924. He was an 18-year-old student when he enlisted on the 19th of June 1942. So here is the summary record of service for John. At the top, we have his personal information, including his next of kin, who was his father. At the bottom, we can see he was enlisted as aircrew and then promoted over the next few months until he was commissioned as an airman pilot in 1943. At the bottom right, you can see which units John was posted to, his final posting on this form being to the 78th Squadron. And on the back, there are details of his courses and summary assessments of John's proficiency. This photograph here, which comes from the Australian War Memorial, shows John circled with other members of the 78th Squadron in Dutch New Guinea in 1943. And unfortunately, John was killed in a flying accident at Wentworth in New South Wales in October 1944. This is recorded on his service sheet. The file also contains more detailed information about his training and operational flights. By August 1944, he had 282 operational flying hours under his cap. And here we see the different types of planes that John flew, from a Tiger Moth, Kitty Hawk, and a Wirraway, which is pictured here. Sometimes you'll also find what are known as confidential reports on officers' files. These were completed about every 6 months by a superior officer. So how do we actually find and access World War service records? Step one is to gather as much information as possible before you start, including their full name, date of birth, place of birth, service number, and next of kin details. Checking the nominal roles can be a good step prior to searching our website, as this will confirm that the individual served. The third step is to then go to our record search tool on the National Archives of Australia website. So for the First World War, you'll need to search on the Australian War Memorial site with their nominal roll. There's also a great website called the AIF Project, developed by the Australian Defence Force Academy, known as ADFA. It's based on information extracted from the original World War I service records and other sources. For the Second World War, the Department of Veteran Affairs manages the nominal roll on their website. So this is the Australian War Memorials World War I nominal roll. You can use a person's name to do a keyword search. So here I'm searching for Hugh Coventry. I get one entry for Hugh Norman Coventry, service number 3787, 24th Australian Infantry Battalion. So that way I know that I'm confident that I've found the correct Hugh Norman Coventry. And the Australian War Memorial's nominal roll is based on the original nominal roll prepared after World War I. So here we see the original entry for Hugh, including his service number, rank, name, battalion, his date of enlistment, status on the nominal roll, KIA stands for killed in action, and the date of his death. So this is the homepage for the AIF project website that I mentioned earlier. And this is the information generated for Hugh Coventry by the AIF project website. As you can see, it provides a nice summary of information. So for the Second World War, here's the nominal roll page on the Department of Veteran Affairs website. And so here we are conducting a search for Wilma Oram. And these are the results. This is a summary of the information contained on her service record. You can also print out a certificate if you like, which contains this information. So to actually access the original service records, you need to visit our website, www.naa.gov.au. Our online database or catalogue is called Record Search, which is the big blue button. And this is what you can use to find records. So this will then take you to a basic keyword search. You can use the name of the service person as keywords. Here I've typed in the name Wilma Oram, and then you just click search. So it's come up with two results. The first is from series B883, and it's a World War II Army service record. You may also find there are other records about your person of interest. In this case, there is a second file about Wilma, which from the title appears to be an application for an Army commission. If you click onto the item, you can get more information. This is what you will see on the left-hand side. If you click on the series number, which is the blue hyperlink, you can then find out more about the series that it belongs to, and that's on the right-hand side of this screen. So if we go back to the item screen, you can then access the digitized copy by clicking on the View Digital Copy on the right-hand side. You can then view the file digitally, and you can also download and save a PDF version by clicking the Export to PDF or Print button, which is down the bottom of the screen. So this page summarises the World War service records which have been digitised. All World War I Army service records in the B2455s have been digitised. This includes over 375,000 items. All Royal Australian Navy service records from 1911 to 1970 have been digitised. For the Second World War, most of the records have been digitised. National Archives received a $10 million grant to digitise Army and Air Force service records. This covered the series B883, B884 and A9300. Also, most of A9301 has been digitised, and we continue to digitise more from this series. As we are talking millions of pages, however, this can still take some time to load onto Record Search. So some tips and tricks. If you can't find what you are looking for, firstly, try alternative spellings of the names. So John Jeffrey Gadsden, the RAF pilot whose file we looked at earlier, illustrates this point well. We have multiple records for him. In some, his surname is spelled Gadsden, and at other times it's Gadssen. In this case, the different spelling is a typo. However, it's good to bear this in mind when conducting your search. It is also worth noting that not all of the information that service people gave when enlisting was accurate. Dates of birth are a classic example. So many people would raise or lower their age so that they could enlist. Some people even enlisted under aliases, which can make it hard to identify the records. For World War I, the AIF project has a list of known aliases from World War I service personnel. There is no equivalent for World War II, however, yet. Okay. And so here is a screenshot of some of the aliases listed on the AIF project. There are currently over 1,000 known aliases on the list. So sometimes people have difficulty locating the service records of people who have served in both World War I and World War II. Often this is because the service records for the two wars have been amalgamated into one. For example, Stanley George Savage, who was one of the founders of Legacy, served in World War I. Whilst there is an entry for him in the B2455s, all it consists of is a notice saying his file has been amalgamated with his World War II service file. So you then need to look at finding his later file. And so Stanley's later file is in the series B883, and when we look at the digital image, we find his World War I service papers are included in there. So another problem people sometimes have is when they can't find someone's World War II service record. Often the answer to this is that they continued to serve in the Army after 1945 or later re-enlisted, so that their World War II records have then been amalgamated with their post-World War II Army service records. So if you look at the example on the right, this is the nominal roll entry for a World War II soldier, Lawrence Joseph Moon. He served in World War II but continued serving until 1948 and was enrolled in the post-war Army. So the giveaway here is his service number. The first number, 3843, is a post-World War II Army service number, whilst the VX number is a World War II AIF number. So if someone's records are in the post-war Army series, the series number B2458, these records are currently not in our custody. They are still with Department of Defence. And Defence have special processes to release copies to next of kin free of charge. However, you can also request access via the National Archives. So if you cannot find what you're looking for on Record Search, you can submit a reference inquiry and we will undertake some searches for you. You can do this via our website. So go to the home page, select the Help with Your Research tab, then the Ask Us About the Collection option. And from here, you can select the type of inquiry that you wish to submit. This is what a general reference inquiry form looks like. Once submitted, we aim to respond to you within 30 days. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for listening.